Well, that
Here
time
we
again,
are.
here we are. We should be having lunch and doing this.
That's right. And every day we're hit with incredible numbers and incredible events.
9.1.
9.1 inflation rate.
Yeah. So, I mean, it was supposed to peak 2 months ago, then it was going to peak last month. Now it's up 0.6.
Einar.
Where are you going?
Einar, you go back to the middle of last year, a year ago. IMF, World Bank, the Fed, major banks, Morgan Stanley, Goldman Sachs, all came out with projections of between 2.8 to 3 inflation rate for 2022. And we're already at 9.1. Something went wrong there.
Yeah, but what you know, if somebody's out there and they're just saying, well, how can these guys be off? They're supposed to be the professionals. What is turning it? Is it just what happened with Ukraine? Is it the loose money that's out there? Is it, you know, the Fed balance sheet, which is just way, way too big?
Yeah, the Fed's balance sheet. I think it's number one. You know, there has never been a case in which the government printed so much money in such a short period of time. Yeah. Maybe because of COVID, maybe because of other things. You're talking about trillions and trillions and trillions, right?
Well, the stimulus, I mean, it was very broad-based. I mean, there's a real difference. In the U.S., they just gave it to people.
That's
regardless
right.
if they needed it or they're out of a job or they're in a job, they got a stimulus check. In Europe, they did it through the employers. So you were told as an employer, you keep this guy on the payroll, we'll give you money to do that. It's, well, first off, the Europeans spent less. They still injected money.
Yeah.
But are we facing a hangover in the U.S. from, in essence, putting too much money on the table at the same time, which is, you know, makes everything looks good for the short term, but it's like a sugar donut.
That's right. And then you have the issue of supply chain, the issue of breaking down a supply chain.
But why is the supply chain breaking down? I mean, everything's the same. There's nothing changed, actually. You know, other than trade with China, it seems like there shouldn't be much more demand than 2019, right?
That's right. I think there's several reasons here. One is because of COVID, the EU, supposed to be a common market, became not a common market in terms of the supply chain because they shut the borders. For quite some time, in fact, for many months. And that would really break down the supply chain. And also, in terms of the EU, you also have the Brexit.
Yeah, we could spend hours talking about that and
That's
just
right.
kind of harm that the UK has done to itself now Boris is gone.
And then the other part is, without really thinking about the ramifications, the sanctions imposed on Russia in terms of food, in terms of energy, in terms of fertilizer.
Well, also disruption to Ukraine.
That's right.
You going in there, it's, you know, you're
Wiped
basically,
out.
it's wiped out.
Yeah.
Can't export wheat if it's in the fields where you're fighting.
That's right. And also, as our Latin American friends know very well, they can't get the fertilizers that they desperately need.
And this seems to be a big issue. I mean, there have been reports coming out of the EU that because they can't get adequate fertilizer, it could be anywhere between 6 and 8% effect on overall crops at a time when you're already short. That's going to be nice. I mean, we were talking to somebody in South America last night, and he was saying that, I mean, they're desperate for fertilizer. They won't be able to plant. It's going to have a huge effect. Could be as much as 10, 15%.
Which is substantial because they are major exporters of commodities, of grain. And then, if we really look back, I remember we were talking about this a couple of years ago. Phase one was because of COVID, shut down of borders in Europe. Who are the agricultural workers in Europe? You have Eastern Europeans working in Germany.
Same in
Turkey,
America.
South Americans
in the United States.
In the United States. You have North Africans working in France. So all of a sudden, you have a complete shutdown in the spring planting season of agriculture.
Okay. So we've talked about all the issues.
Yeah.
The fact is the Fed, the government, seem to be completely botching this whole thing.
Yeah.
And they don't seem to have a clue where they're going. They keep doubling down, but it's not stopping anything. It seems to be accelerating it.
Yeah. And we come back to, in terms of the government's competence. You know, this is something which is really boggles the mind. Europeans supposed to be very sophisticated. American scholars, strategists are supposed to be very sophisticated. How could they not have projected potentially what sanctions on Russia would do?
It
boggles the mind.
Yeah, it boggles. Okay, so we're going to push to create a war, and that is going to have a rebound. But you know, there's another school of thought that the U.S. is the one who's actually a lot of pain, but in the long run, benefiting. They're going to have Europe. You know, they're going to have to buy grain.
And
Europe is going to energy, and food is going to come from the U.S. All right. So long term, that's shoring up markets. The question is price.
What were they talking about? In Germany now, natural gas is what, 600% higher?
Last time I saw it was 470%, but it's going to go higher. Hungary has just announced that they're calling an emergency because they're just saying there will not be enough gas to heat, you know, Europe for this winter.
Yeah.
And there are no alternatives because you cannot build plants fast enough to take up the excess capacity.
Oh, there's another very interesting tidbit that we picked up last night on what is happening in Germany. Germany, biggest car producer in the world, right? An exporter. Now, cars need aluminum, or aluminum, as Americans would say. But the aluminum companies have these forward contracts on electricity because it's a major consumer of electricity. So instead of using electricity to produce aluminum, they're selling their forward contracts because the margins are so high.
They can make more by selling their forward
contract lot more, exactly.
than they could by selling an aluminum, which is going to be a real problem because these car companies are going to come to a halt.
The car companies without aluminum, how can they produce cars? You know, it's getting ridiculous. Now, some of the Germans are saying that, oh, instead of using aluminum, we use steel. That's going back to 50 years.
Yeah, well, that also adds a lot of weight to these cars.
That's right.
And then the fuel efficiency goes down, and that's not very good for global warming.
That's
All right, last week we talked about Shinzo Abe before his tragic death. And, you know, this week I saw a lot of articles, and you know, some articles there's kind of a glossing over of everything that happened. And I think you have to be really clear. There's a tragedy that happened to this individual.
On a personal basis.
On a personal basis, and also on a national basis. You cannot have leaders assassinated like this.
That's right.
But his legacy is indisputable. Here's a guy who wanted to resurrect his grandfather's legacy, his grandfather was
war criminal,
Class A war criminal. He was in charge of the labor in Manchuria.
That's right.
He was
human testing of bioweapons.
Human testing of bioweapons. He came back to Japan. He signed the declaration of war against the United States. He was only saved from a trial because the U.S. thought that he could unite a conservative faction against socialists. And then, you know, Shinzo Abe, what has he done? He didn't want to confront the issue of comfort women, tried to deny it. He was early on involved in trying to rewrite the history of the Nanjing massacre, the rape of Nanjing.
Yeah.
And he's also, within Japanese schools, he changed the curriculum so that it does not reflect what happened, what Japan's role was. And he's done this, you know, kind of on the side. It's why Japan has terrible relationship right now with South Korea.
That's right.
All right, because they're saying, how can you deny something? He even went back, there was an apology that was made, and he first went back and tried to revisit it, and he was asking the question, why was this apology made? As if there was, you know, a question about Japanese culpability in this. So, I mean, his economic policies, if you look at it, Abenomics, it hasn't worked. And I was surprised by the articles. No one is really talking about it. They said, oh, a new era. He brought Japan into the future. But what I see is a man who said he wants Japan to be a normalized nation, to get out from under the United States. But he chose to do it on a military basis as opposed to an economic basis. And I think in history, that's where people will remember his biggest mistake. He should have been there figuring out a way to make Japan economically strong, get out from underneath.
The Plaza Accord.
The Plaza Accord,
that's right.
back in '86, which has basically seen the Japanese economy go sideways. If he had done that, I think it would be quite different. I think he would have gone more towards his Asian neighbors.
That's right. That's right.
Further away from the U.S.
Yeah, exactly. I think instead of moving ideologically toward so-called normalcy, which means building up the military and so on and so forth, if he had really addressed the issue of the ramifications of the Plaza Accord, it would have made a big difference. But Abenomics was money printing. Yeah. Once again.
Same U.S., same everywhere else. It's reflected in the yuan, in the yen today. I mean, which is at lows not seen since
136, 137. That's right.
Yeah, and nothing, no relief in sight.
How can you have a powerhouse like Japan, in terms of exports, for decades, right? Mm-hmm. Super powerhouse, to go negative in trade for 10 months in a row.
It's almost impossible.
Yeah.
All right, so let's give him some credit. He did get TPP restarted to CPTPP after the U.S. bailed on it. He did get women to work. I don't want to be completely critical, but I don't think when history looks at his economic policies and the way that he has tried to engineer Japan's independence from the U.S., that it's going to be a very soft review.
No.
What's your thought?
For Chinese, feelings toward Shinzo Abe is really actually quite complicated.
Yeah.
Yeah. The negative side is there, obviously, but he also did make an effort to improve relations with China compared to the Japanese politicians now.
Yeah, but he was a main instigator of the Quad.
That's right.
So I mean, it seems like he was jumping back and forth.
And forth.
Well, I mean, he met, in terms of world leaders, he met with Putin over 20 times.
That's right.
And now that's all out the window. I mean, they were trying to negotiate a peace terms because they never actually signed
a peace agreement.
And they still have the territorial disputes. But now that's gone.
Yeah, Northern Islands.
Yeah. It seems like the whole world is going backwards, that we're literally going back to the 70s. Race issues.
That's right.
Voter suppression.
That's right. Civil rights in general.
Yeah.
Women's rights.
Women's rights. I mean, it's like going back to the future.
That's right.
It's not a very good future. Let's talk about Hong Kong. There's been some talk about, some articles that's talking about, there was long-term planning by Beijing about Hong Kong, that this was all, kind of set out. And there just doesn't seem to be a reality check on the fact that the long-term planning was really after it was clear, 84, that Hong Kong was going back to China. All of a sudden, democracy has to be fast-forwarded, but not even complete democracy, very limited democracy, based on the system that the British had in place. So everything was kind of consultative and things like that. Oh yes, there were some elected seats. I mean, people they have the misconception that somehow mainland was involved in setting up what was already there.
Ultimately, when it comes to Hong Kong, the first and foremost principle is Hong Kong is part of China. Yeah. And from there, things flow. Yeah. Instead of Hong Kong has been and will continue to be influenced by British colonialism.
Well, there is an influence there. I mean, they left the poison pill behind.
Absolutely.
But now you see there are 4 task groups being set up by the new leader, and it seems to be all on social issues. He's talking about getting not social and economic issues, which are related, He's talking about new housing, the new city that they're going to build near Shenzhen, how they're going to try to get their trade and also their financial institutions back up.
Yeah.
So I think people should wait and see. Let's see what happens in a couple of years, and let's compare that to what happened in the previous few years before COVID.
That's right.
Well, that's quite
the
something.
Riots of 2019.
So, Ukraine and Russia. It just goes on and on. I mean, Russia continues to gain ground. The current president of Ukraine continues to say that there will be no compromise and not 1 inch of Ukrainian soil will be given away. Is there any hope of peace? We're just looking at a long-term grinding war.
I think in terms of this long grinding war, who can actually better withstand the pressure of war? Is it Europe or is it Russia? Russia has energy, has food supply. They can continue to live well. Like you said, the Russian ruble actually has been the strongest currency this year.
Yeah, it made gains where everyone else has lost.
That's right. But for Europe, no energy, no food, what will happen this winter? And it's okay to take 9 to 10 million refugees on a weekly basis, but on a monthly basis, I think
6 months, 8 months, 9 months, when you don't have enough energy and food for your own people.
So I think Europe is going to be facing a recalculation of this whole support for Ukraine.
You know, as part of this, there was a white paper that came out screaming, China is the biggest intelligence threat to, and I think the UK joined in, to the United States. I found that odd. I mean, the US spends more on defense than the next 9 nations put together.
That's right.
1/10, or about 11% actually, of that is spent on intelligence.
Yeah.
Okay, so their intelligence budget is larger than the vast majority of defense budgets.
This is absolutely the same garbage that we get.
Is this the, I'm going to accuse you of doing exactly what I'm doing?
This is the same garbage. For example, who was tapping the cell phone of Angela Merkel?
That was necessary.
That was necessary, you know?
Well, she's an ally. She doesn't mind.
She doesn't mind us tapping in, right?
Oh, of course not. Yeah, she's just real happy to know that the CIA is monitoring her grocery list.
That's right.
No, but I mean, you know, Snowden.
The hypocrisy is incredible.
I mean, the Manning leaks, the Snowden leaks.
Right.
I mean, you go back to the Pentagon Papers. You know, there's just one lie over another lie. They've actually even given more money now to disinformation.
Yeah.
Right. And yet, they actually come out and say China's the biggest intelligence threat. I mean, the hypocrisy of it. I mean, we do really live in a post-fact, post-hypocritical world.
Actually, there is an element of truth in that China poses as the biggest intelligence threat to the United States, because in terms of data, in terms of technology, China has become increasingly sophisticated in having the technologies to do it. But do they do it is a different story.
All countries engage in spying.
That's right.
But it's just hypocritical to insist that, you know, you're the biggest threat when I'm the biggest threat.
That's right.
When I'm the one who's monitoring my allies,
That's
everybody.
Right. That's
when
right.
I have the most sophisticated network, when I am out there pushing disinformation on a daily basis. How is it? So can we just take this as another part of the disinformation process?
It is, absolutely. And it's another China bashing. Okay.
Well, it seems nothing China could do. On the other hand, New Zealand, Jacinda Ardern came out and just said, look, don't treat, you know, we don't want the inevitable war created by these attitudes that it is inevitable. Mm-hmm. And I thought that was refreshing. I mean, she's playing, you know, both sides. She's a small country. Mm-hmm. I mean, she represents a small country.
She represents a small country, but it's really quite interesting. She also is very pragmatic, whereas the Australians, for example, continue to do China bashing in a massive way. But New Zealand, among the Five Eyes, has been the most pragmatic. Trade, commerce, economic relations, business development seems to be focused.
But the irony is that Australia is more dependent on China than New Zealand in terms of trade. I mean, her quote was, China has a, quote, crucial role to play, unquote. And I think that would be recognized by everybody, but I mean, it's not obviously.
That's a very positive statement, actually.
Well, it is. And, you know, is this the beginning of people opening their eyes up, or is this just one voice in the wilderness?
I think it's not a question of people opening their eyes, because ultimately the U.S. will not do anything long-term strategic in terms of building up relations with China. They will continue to think in terms of China as we have to slow it down. We have to deter it from continued growth and development.
Yeah, but how can you do that? China is now ahead of the U.S. in many things, not all things. The U.S. has tremendous strengths and resources. But this idea that you can, it seems the more the U.S. tries to slow China down, actually, the more advanced China becomes, because they're forced to do indigenous innovation.
Which they're doing very rapidly. But the whole idea for the Americans, I think it's still a question of strategically wanting to retard the process, to just slow it down.
It's not working. I mean, the deficit is through the roof.
Do they care if it works or not?
Yes, if that's your goal, if your goal is to contain China, to retard China's growth, and everything you're doing is accomplishing the exact opposite, when do you start to say, maybe it's time to change tax?
Okay, depends on who's in the leadership and what the leaderships look for. Like, for example, I mean, this trade war thing, right? Everybody knows it's hurting 95% American population, 5% China.
US
right?
from China.
Yeah, right. So everybody knows that. But still, Biden could have lifted it more than a year and a half ago. They don't.
It seems like he's on the cusp of it. I mean, with 9.1% inflation, where is he? I mean, he's got to do something. And this takes a bite up, point and a half, brings it down to 8.
There's another aspect
maybe
to this.
7.5.
He has to do it now. He was able to drag it out for some time. But if he doesn't do it now, the impact on the midterm elections will be quite substantial. It takes a couple of months lead time.
Let's talk about that. I mean, the hearings, the January 6th hearings, I mean, they seem to be slowly and methodically picking up steam in terms of connecting dots. But this last week, they said they were going to connect Donald Trump directly to these white supremacist groups like the Oath Keepers and some of the others. I don't know if the Oath Keepers are white supremacists, but they were in league working with other things. QAnon, Oath Keepers, and then there was another group that the very short time security specialist for the United States, Colonel. He was indicted. Getting old. Anyways, but it seems that they're doing. How would you explain that to somebody who's just it's really hard.
I think the Republican Party is allowing this to happen because they want to come out from under the wings of Donald Trump's.
Yeah, but they're not looking good. I mean, so many of their leaders are. I mean, they were protesting it. The things the text messages they sent are damning. They're saying, it was clear, this guy's out of control. He's got to stop this. He started it. He's responsible. I mean, and these are the people who are closest to him. Brad Parscale, who put him in the office in the first place, on his campaign side. I mean, his closest aides, everybody was trying to calm him down. And then they have this insane meeting in the middle of the night where people are screaming and offering to fight each other.
Well, I think all of those close to him, of course, are thinking about their personal liabilities in this process, right? Yeah. But the other part is, again, Republicans trying to draw the red line between them and Donald Trump.
Yeah, it's an interesting way of looking at it. That there are moderate Republicans out there who are tired of Donald Trump and his influence on the Republican Party,
and the impact that he would have on Republican Party's voters going forward.
You think he gets indicted? I still do think at some point there's so much
damning influence.
Well, I mean, it covers all the bases.
That's right.
He has sexual assault allegations against him. He has
tax evasion,
fraud.
That's right.
And now, trying to basically keep himself in power through a coup.
Violence. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, at some point, something's got to stick. That's all I'm thinking. I don't think that he's going to be the nominee for the Republican side.
No, but it's also quite interesting that you look at a country like America, given its political setup, to have somebody like that with this laundry list of illegalities can be president.
And what's really telling is this was the guy who, The Apprentice. He was the guy who could choose the right people to do the right job. And now he's basically turning on everybody around him.
Yeah.
I mean, even the people who are, quote, still trying to be loyal to him, like his ex-chief of staff, he's just, he's Meadows, all these guys, they're all being thrown under the bus. And he selected all these people. So how is it that he's because he always says, I'm the smartest guy ever, I know how to pick people, everything.
I know that.
Yes,
he knows everything.
He knows everything, except, and I'm going to be interesting to see, whenever he had in a deposition, I don't remember. I have no recollection of that. I have the best memory, and did you ever say you have the best memory in the world? I don't know if I remember that.
Actually, I think it's a good lesson for the people of the world to see what America has become, or how horrendous that American politics and American political system and American politicians can be.
Let's talk about the currency issues. That's what we were just talking as we were offset.
Euro
below
the dollar.
US dollar, going lower.
And the Japanese yen hitting 135, 136.
Lowest since the 1970s.
That's right.
All right. So, people have to understand that the euro traded on average about 118. All right. It got up to as high as 160 and as low as 84.
Yeah.
But the range has been 118. To go below, it's not only psychological, it also points to the fact that everybody is seeing that Europe is in a world of hurt. The central bank can't seem to do anything to stem the flow. They have problems with food and energy.
And the refugees and the war.
But where does it stop? I mean, we're looking at a recession. Does it turn into depression because the ineptness of these governments to handle these things, or are they fighting the last war? When there's a new war to be fought. I mean, the economics have changed.
From Wall Street, what I've gathered from Wall Street is good. The euro is down. That means European assets are cheap.
I know, but at some point the banks are going to start calling in this money because we're looking at. I think the Fed might move to a full 100 basis points. If they do that, massive shock.
Yeah.
And the banks, the people are, with floating loans and things like that, they're going to get hit hard.
Yeah.
And when that happens,
companies too,
they're going to start calling in the money, and the money isn't there. So
that's right.
It might sound great to the richest people, this idea that they can buy the assets, but for Europe, now you've just hit the inflation button again.
That's right.
Because now everything they import in terms of food and energy,
prices up,
prices
crazy.
Up.
Yeah.
So I mean, and it seems to be a downward spiral.
It is a downward spiral, and I think much of it comes from the government's incompetence.
Well, what can they do? They have monetary union, but not fiscal union.
That's one part, but the other part is following blindly behind the United States on the sanctions against Russia.
They're killing themselves.
They're killing themselves. It's committing suicide.
Yeah, but how do they get out from under this? I mean, unless there's the population starts shifting their attitude and saying, look,
I'm afraid not, because the impression that I have is the polarization of societies in Europe is also increasing. also among the EU countries, Eastern Europe versus Western Europe versus Northern Europe, and then versus Southern Europe, it's increasingly become populist politicians are gaining pace in many of these places.
Okay, but let's get back to the currencies. How does it stop? Because at this point, the dollar is getting stronger. But at some point, when the banks start having problems in the US, when the cost of paying for the massive deficit that's been built up comes home, the dollar has to go back down. But the question is, where does it go? Is this an opportunity for China? I mean, are you going to put your money into Japan, Europe? I mean, how many Swiss francs can you buy?
If you look at portfolio management on a global basis, it's very, very clear. The US, okay, dollar becomes strong. The Fed has to increase interest and also has to deleverage its balance sheet and all that. What would that lead to? Recession, which means, again, in terms of asset prices would decline in the United States because of a depression.
I sense here that there's a pattern here that you believe that this is really going to help the super wealthy.
Yeah,
we're going to add a few more trillion
to their
already massive asset bases.
Yeah, but the population is going to suffer tremendously.
What time? At what point in time do people wake up? I mean, the amount of suffering you're talking about. If it goes to a depression, 10% of the people lose their jobs. People are out in the streets.
As they are now.
Well, they're being pushed out. What is it? Since the beginning of the year, 570 million people have been pushed into poverty.
Yeah. On a global basis. But I think this is the cycle.
Oh, 57 million,
57.
Not 57.
If you really look at the cycle, okay, to hit inflation, you got to raise interest rates. And in the 1970s, it hit 20%, right? In terms of it.
But it didn't tame it. It came around to a business cycle thing where assets needed to be repriced down to levels where they were sustainable.
That's the cycle.
The investment, there's a return on the investment, but
yeah, that's the cycle that we're heading into now, and it's going to be far more damaging than what happened in the 1970s. Because the amounts we're talking about is that much more substantial. The Fed's balance sheet is 9 trillion. Yeah. When it was 2 trillion, they were having trouble handling it. 9 trillion, and try to debalance sheet that.
It just doesn't seem to be any kind of answer out there. And
it's all short term because so much of it has been accumulated and it's reached such a point where short-term solutions will not solve any problem. And I think in Japan's case, for example, right, they've been printing money for 20 years. Printing. They still stick to 0% interest, which means, 0% interest or negative interest. That means there will be more running off the Japanese yen into the dollar. So they're now talking about the possibility of hitting 150 yen to the dollar, which will be a complete disaster.
Well, but they have a tremendous amount of treasuries. So even as the dollar strengthens, those treasuries are ironically worth more. So if they bought them at X, now they can buy more.
Even Japan has started to, in the last quarter, has started to sell a lot of the US treasuries just to prop up a little bit the yen.
But they're not alone. As we talked last week, everyone else is doing it. All the allies
That's right.
are selling treasuries. But at what point does the hot market, which is flowing back, hot money is flowing back into the United States because of these rises, but the sovereign funds are kind of moving away from it. At some point, something's got to give.
You have basically two large pools. One that is looking for the liquidity and the safety of the US Treasury, right? And then you have the other pool, which is going into the stock market in terms of company performance. Now, when you go into a recession, company performance is not going to be outstanding. or depression, you can imagine what it will be like. They're already forecast in terms of there will be significant downgrades of a lot of the Fortune 500 companies, or the SP 500, because of earning shortfalls. The projections have already started to come.
Along financial lines, have we seen the death of the SPAC? Is that officially over?
I think so.
That was one of those hot ideas that was floating around on Wall Street.
That's right.
Throw money into a blind trust and then figure out what you're going to buy.
Exactly.
I never quite understood it. I knew it was a fad, but it was just really a little strange.
Blank check company.
Yes.
Yes.
So basically that's over. All right, let's talk about Uvalde, Texas. They released video. The police are sitting outside the classroom listening to shots being fired. Kids are being killed.
It did nothing.
77 minutes.
Yeah.
Did nothing. It's been very slow coming out, but it seems to underline this idea, that, I need a gun. Why? Because the police are not going to protect me. Can you imagine thinking to yourself that if I call the police and there's an active shooter in my house or near me, that they're not going to come? They're going to sit outside and wait for what? I don't know exactly. I guess hopefully we'll find out. But apparently there's very little that can be done. The police chief, or not police chief, he was in charge of the school district security, became an alderman, elected representative. Now he's resigned. Yeah, but
he refused to attend the municipal meetings.
Yeah, well, he was afraid of the things. But there seems to be a blue wall. No one wants to be talking about it. There's a lot of finger pointing. The mayor has said this. But doesn't this just create this idea that, the U.S. is failing in its basic duty to provide
protect its people? Yeah.
Yeah, safety and order. If you can't do that,
but this is nothing new. It's been happening.
I know, but this is as brutal as you're going to get. Children in a classroom being periodically shot. You can hear the things. Policemen, lots of them, with protective gear, with guns, with with shields, ballistic shields, are standing there, doing nothing. How can I have things? One of my good friends, his name is Enrique Figueroa, and he was born in Uvalde, Texas.
Oh.
Yeah. And he went on to become an undersecretary of agriculture in the Clinton campaign. And he wrote an op-ed piece where he said, look, Uvalde, Texas has been a racist place for a long time. All right. When he was growing up and things like that, it was apartheid. There was the place where Hispanics could be, and there were a place where whites could be. And he said, obviously, it's still pretty much the same way. You can still have faces that look Hispanic, but they still seem to be working for this kind of apartheid system where, it's okay imagine if these had all been white children instead of Hispanic children, what the outcry would be. But it isn't. And even though that some of these members are things, and I see this a lot going on.
Yeah, against Asians as well.
You have Asians who are being tougher on Asians. For instance, the lady in Australia, the foreign minister, she's all gung ho and showing that she can be.
Catherine Dai.
Yeah.
For example.
Tsai.
But I think for me, what I see happening is that because of media and the internet, what is happening in America is now for the whole world to see. The story of honoring the great nation of America is fading away, because these are things which people see, like you said, basic functions of the government in terms of providing security and safety to its population is not being fulfilled. Time and again it occurs in America that kids get shot. Time and again people with rifles, like on a rooftop, start shooting people. These things, I think it's inconceivable in most countries. And all of this, because of the internet, is increasingly influencing people's view or attitude toward America.
No, I'd agree. The soft power deficit is growing.
It's really fading, which is good, because so much of what we see from the U.S. is hypocrisy.
Well, it's not only the U.S. Let's talk a little bit about Great Britain. I mean, Boris Johnson is gone. Okay, so the clown has left the stage, as somebody put it.
How would the Queen react if an Indian in Britain of Indian descent becomes the Prime Minister?
Well, what's interesting is they showed this this group of people he had put around them, and they were all color. They were women, people of color, things like that. And you have his one of his cabinet members, who's quite a few of them are vying to become Prime Minister. One of whom, his wife is a heiress to a multi-billion-dollar fortune. And hasn't been paying taxes and things. Only a problem because he was head of the Exchequer, which is, you're supposed to go collect those taxes. Anyway,
Treasury Secretary.
Now he wants to be Prime Minister. All right. I mean, I find it odd, but what I found most odd is they show this. I saw this picture of all these people of color and gender up there, and they're saying, "Oh, Britain's turned a new leaf." But, Boris put those people around him not because of their willingness to follow what was, in essence, corrupt and befuddling non-strategy. Take Great Britain out of Europe. That'll show them. Just one thing to the next. I mean, the only people who seem to be sad about Boris Johnson going are the people in the government in Ukraine. Literally.
Best friend.
Well, they said it's sad that he's going. He was a great champion for Ukraine. Too bad he wasn't a great champion for Great Britain.
That's right.
Yeah.
Well, but like you said, all the people around him were part of vested interest groups.
But they were being, I mean, this is something that so many minorities, even with gender issues, it can be very easy to switch over. This Stockholm syndrome. You start, feeling like you're part of the establishment, that you got to keep those people in line. Well, who are those people? They're the same people you're looking at in the mirror, but for some reason they don't see it.
They don't see it.
They feel that they have to be tougher on their own people to show their independence. And this is really starting to, it seems to be a trend. Vicious. Yeah. People turning against their own kind. I mean, how can you be a conservative in Britain and say that you're for people of color? This is the group that was putting on this thing of showing people of color trooping across the channel.
That's right.
And it was an instantaneous reaction by the populace to vote against it.
Honestly speaking, I am less and less interested in following what's happening in Britain, because
you think it's irrelevant?
I think it's increasingly become totally, completely irrelevant. The UK.
It's the 5th largest economy in the world. And it just doesn't seem to go anywhere. I mean, they don't have the manufacturing they used to have.
9.1% inflation rate we're talking about. That's last month. We don't know what it'll be this month.
Well, obviously it's going to be higher this month.
That's right. They're talking about cutting off North Sea gas.
They have a strike.
Yeah.
So about 300,000 barrels equivalent of gas per day will not be delivered.
That's right.
On top of the non-delivery from Russia.
That's right.
Government is really failing.
Well, they've made themselves irrelevant as well by being more U.S. than U.S., being the favorite lapdog.
Yeah, but Australia, UK,
not
New Zealand, but Great Britain,
and
U.S.,
even
Canada. But I mean, there's a sense here. These are predominantly, overwhelmingly white nations.
That's
they
right.
speak English. They hold themselves out as the protectors of everything sacred. Yet, almost all of them
are failing.
Are failing.
Yeah. WASP.
Well, but I mean, you can't just say it's white Anglo-Saxon problem. It's arrogance.
Yeah.
This entitlement mentality that they accuse minorities of having. The greatest entitlement I've seen are, these nations. And I see it in this kind of colonial, American exceptionalism, but colonialism 2.0.
Yeah.
The new gunboat is nuclear. And they are arriving in Asia, trying to, once again, set China off against India, set Japan off against, create the same kind of confusion and chaos that in the Middle East, Africa, South America, where haven't these powers gone and left a legacy of peace?
Right.
There isn't one. I mean, the United States, 17 years, only 17 years in its history was it not involved in conflict.
But all of this, I think the optimistic view is that all of this is now becoming increasingly apparent to the whole world. The non-aligned reforming, non-aligned 2.0, right? Yeah. South America, we don't know what will happen to the elections in Brazil, but the elections in Argentina and Colombia is very, very clear. The outcome is against the previous U.S. colonial domination.
Conservative, the Chicago School of Economics, which apparently has just failed, but no one's told them.
Yeah, the ASEAN countries also is becoming very, very clear.
So is this going to be a North-South divide where you basically have global South versus colonial powers and their desire to
It's beginning to move in that direction, because if you look at the non-aligned, refusal to sanction Russia by so many of the major developing countries is a very clear movement toward non-alignment. And it's, it's taking place as we speak today. Even Mexico,
Yeah, I mean, Mexico, they just put together that they're going to put some infrastructure, 11 billion or something, in infrastructure along the border, 40 billion in infrastructure. I don't know exactly what that means. It's not clear. I'm sure it's a nice number, and then we'll see what actually happens.
Like the 78 billion that President of Ukraine is asking the Europeans to sign up for rebuilding Ukraine.
Well, we don't even know. How can you rebuild something that's in the process of destruction right now?
That's right.
And you don't even know what part of Ukraine is going to be rebuilt.
I don't see the European governments and the U.S. government putting up $78 billion or euros.
Especially right now, at a time when they don't. I mean, it's not like they have extra money in the bank.
That's right.
I mean, they're massive deficits, massive problems at home. So,
dreams.
Yeah. You had a great quote about the whole Boeing thing and how they were complaining and subsidizing, complaining about Chinese companies being subsidized by
the military and so on.
By the military.
Yeah.
Yeah. That was
well. Actually, it was. I saw a lot of commentary on the internet on the Airbus purchase by the Chinese 3 airlines. You're talking about well over $30 billion. I mean, it's a very significant order. And I think most of the commentaries that I saw was that, okay, US, you're going to continue this trade war thing with us. We have other channels or sources to buy, right? And Airbus is not worse than Boeing 737 MAX.
Well, at least, it's better, and they have an assembly plant here.
In Tianjin?
Yes. Whereas Boeing only has a paint plant.
But what I thought it came down to is that there are 3 aspects that the Chinese were very, very keen on addressing, and that they feel the US should address. One is the trade war tariffs, right? Yeah. Second is putting all these Chinese companies on the entities list to say that they're tied to the Chinese PLA, the military. And the third is unfair treatment in general of Chinese companies. Now, this actually is a little reminder that who's making the strategic bombers for the US Air Force?
Oh, that would be Boeing.
Do
they have a connection to the Defense Department? Should
Oh,
they?
really?
I know, but but this is what I mean about post-hypocrisy.
Yeah.
They come, somebody will come out with a straight face and say, we are opposed to all of these Chinese companies because they have direct
Ties.
contacts to the PLA.
Yeah.
But our contacts to our defense industry
okay.
is okay.
The
That's
military-industrial complex is okay.
And when we spy and have a larger spying budget than you do, that's okay.
Yeah.
If you do any kind of spying, that's bad.
Yeah. No, what it comes down to, though, is another aspect to this. I think the Chinese government did not talk about this at all, talk about Boeing and the military contacts at all, because they're very pragmatic. Potentially, if there are some breakthroughs in terms of the bilateral relations, trade relations, they might pick up a couple Boeings too. So,
there's always room. But I mean,
Yeah.
you know, people said, oh, 30 billion, wow, wow, wow.
it's nothing.
No. There's
Yeah.
$1.5 trillion on the line.
That's right. That's right.
And the question is, where is it going to go?
That's right.
And there's a lot of jobs attached to that.
That's right.
And it seems that America is going to lose out. Nothing.
Well, that's the decision of American politicians.
Well, it is. So, you know, here we have the Blinken,
Yeah.
Wang Yi meeting.
Yeah.
What was your thought? I mean, I didn't see much coming out of it.
5 hours is a long time, though.
5 hours is a long time, but I mean, going in, there was this expectation that they would sort out the issue of trade tariffs, that a face-to-face meeting might be broached between Biden and Xi. That, you know, there could be some real
That's still in the
progress on
cards.
it.
That's still
It's still in the cards, but what comes out? What does Blinken do after the meeting? He doesn't talk about anything other than Taiwan. And Russia.
Yeah.
That's it.
Well, this is
But I mean,
what
that's
I mean.
not. But how is that constructive?
This
I mean,
is-
all the problems in the world today, and he wants to make it about politics. He has 9.1% inflation in the U.S., and it's about Russia.
That's exactly what I mean, because they talk about if they actually cover the issue of trade tariffs and so on and so forth. I'm sure they did. Yeah.
5 hours is a long
Yeah,
time.
it's a long time. The U.S. is still looking at this as a chip, negotiating chip, to force the Chinese to come up with.
But when are they going to figure out? You can't force the Chinese. The Chinese can't force the U.S.
That's right.
U.S. can't force China.
And then, just on simple basis of fairness, it's you who impose these tariffs on the Chinese goods. You know,
Unilateral.
That's right.
By somebody you acknowledge as a crazy man who was trying to.
That's right.
create
No,
this-
how can you use lifting them as a negotiating chip? It doesn't make any sense, especially since it's hurting you, not us. Right?
You know what? I'm sure the Iranians are saying the same thing about the JCPOA.
Yeah.
They said, okay, let's go back to the beginning. You know, just go back to the very beginning, JCPOA. And the Biden administration says, well, but we'd like to improve our position. Wait a second.
Yeah.
You pulled out of
imposed
the
it,
agreement.
exactly.
And now you're saying that you want to improve your position for doing the bad thing.
Exactly.
In which case, everybody should pull out of every agreement and then say, let's
Renegotiate.
renegotiate.
Exactly. That's
But I mean,
the
you
arrogance.
can't do business, you can't do politics.
That's the arrogance.
Yeah, but I mean, it just doesn't make any sense.
But that's becoming so clear to countries around the world, except maybe the Europeans.